The music was still playing when my sister's groom leaned toward me and smiled. He looked at my dress, then at my hands, and said, softly enough to sound polite, "So this is what dirt looks like when it dresses up." A few people laughed. My mother didn't stop them. My father stared at his plate like it wasn't happening. I kept my smile. I didn't correct him. I didn't explain who I was married to. I watched the doors instead. Because my husband was late. Not fashionably late. Deliberately late. And when he finally walked in, the room didn't go quiet because of anger. It went quiet because everyone suddenly understood. They had made a very public mistake. I had known how the day would feel long before it arrived. My sister's wedding was the kind my parents liked to talk about for months. Hotel ballroom. Corporate guests. Carefully chosen seating. My mother described it as elegant, which usually meant there was no room for anyone who didn't fit the picture. That included me. I arrived early, like I always did. It was easier that way. Less explaining. Less watching people decide where to place me. I helped where I could, fixed a loose decoration, held someone's bag. My parents barely noticed. They were busy greeting people who mattered. When guests asked about my husband, my mother answered for me. "Oh, he works on land," she said lightly. "Very simple life." She smiled like she was being generous. No one asked follow-up questions. By the time the ceremony ended, I had already learned my place for the evening. Not at the family table. Not near the front. Off to the side, where conversation didn't linger. At the reception, my sister's groom finally approached me. He had the confidence of someone who had never been challenged. He looked around once, leaned in, and said what he thought was clever. The word dirt didn't sting the way he expected it to. What hurt was how normal it felt. My parents heard it. I know they did. My mother's jaw tightened for half a second. My father shifted in his chair. Neither of them said a word. That silence was louder than the insult. I nodded, smiled, and excused myself like it didn't matter. Like I hadn't spent years learning how to carry myself smaller so no one would feel embarrassed by me. Inside, something settled. Not anger. Not shame. Decision. I checked my phone. No messages. My husband was still on his way. I hadn't told him what had been said. I hadn't needed to. As I stood there watching guests laugh and toast futures that didn't include me, I realized something quietly and completely. This wasn't about farming. It was about control. And I was done trying to earn a seat I was never meant to have. I turned back toward the doors and waited. I didn't confront anyone after that. I stayed where I was supposed to stay. On the edge of conversations. Near the exit. Watching how easily people dismissed what they didn't understand. My parents moved through the room like hosts protecting an image. My mother laughed a little louder than usual. My father kept checking his phone. Neither of them looked in my direction again. That hurt more than the comment. It told me the hierarchy hadn't changed just because I'd grown older. I was still the compromised child. The one who chose wrong. The one they tolerated as long as I didn't ask them to stand up for me. I found a quiet corner near the bar and sat down. I watched couples dance. I watched my sister glow under attention she'd always expected. I watched people ask about careers, investments, travel plans. No one asked me anything. When someone did, my mother answered before I could. She always had. She framed my life like a footnote. They live outside the city. It's a modest setup. They're happy with very little. Each sentence made it easier for others to move on. I checked my phone again. Still nothing. I wasn't worried. I knew why my husband was late. He'd told me weeks ago there was something he needed to finish before coming. Something he couldn't rush. I'd told him to take his time. What surprised me was how calm I felt. I should have been embarrassed. Or angry. Or defensive. Instead, I felt detached, like I was finally watching a play I'd rehearsed for years without realizing it wasn't mine. My sister's groom passed by again, already drunk on approval. He nodded at me like we'd shared a joke. Like I was in on it. I smiled back. That confused him. I noticed my parents watching me then. Not closely. Cautiously. As if they were waiting for a reaction that never came. As if silence unsettled them more than tears would have. That's when I understood the power shift. They expected me to fold. To disappear quietly. To let the moment pass so they wouldn't have to feel uncomfortable. And I did let it pass. Just not the way they expected. I stopped trying to be included. I stopped correcting assumptions. I stopped shrinking my life into something presentable. I sat there, hands folded, posture relaxed, watching the doors. When the music swelled and applause broke out for another toast, the doors at the back of the hall finally opened. I didn't turn right away. I waited for the air to change. It did. Conversations slowed. Someone near me went quiet mid-sentence. The groom stopped laughing. My mother straightened instinctively, like she sensed something out of place. I stood up slowly. Because whatever was about to happen next wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about letting truth walk in on its own. My husband didn't announce himself. He never does. He came in through the side doors, the one staff use, still wearing his work jacket. Clean, pressed, but practical. Boots polished, not flashy. He paused just inside the room, taking in the scene the way he always does. Quietly. Fully. People noticed him because he didn't try to be noticed. A few heads turned. Then a few more. Someone near the front whispered something I couldn't hear. The groom glanced over, frowned, then looked away like it wasn't important. My mother's smile tightened, just a little. My husband found me with his eyes and walked over. No rush. No apology. He kissed my cheek and asked if I'd eaten. I said yes. He nodded and took the seat beside me like it had always been his. That's when the questions started. Not about farming. About contracts. About land. About logistics. A man from my father's table leaned over and asked him where he was based. Another asked how long he'd been in operation. My husband answered plainly. Acreage. Yields. Partnerships. Numbers that didn't sound small when spoken calmly. I watched my parents listen without interrupting for the first time all night. The groom tried to reclaim the room with a joke. It didn't land. He tried again, louder. Still nothing. Attention had shifted. Not dramatically. Naturally. Someone asked my husband if he was the one who'd acquired the neighboring parcels near the river last year. He said yes. Someone else mentioned a recent deal with a distributor. He confirmed it, briefly, then changed the subject. No bragging. No correction. Just facts. I felt the shift before I saw it. The way people reoriented. The way assumptions loosened their grip. My mother leaned forward, eyes narrowing, trying to piece together information she hadn't bothered to ask for before. My father cleared his throat and asked a question he should have asked years ago. My husband answered it without looking at him. The groom finally looked directly at us. At me. At my husband. His smile was gone. He said my name for the first time that night, like he'd just learned it mattered. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because what was happening wasn't a confrontation. It was a recalibration. The room was adjusting to information it had ignored because it didn't fit the story it preferred. My mother excused herself to take a call. My sister stopped laughing. The groom checked his phone again and again, like it might tell him how to recover. My husband leaned in and asked if I wanted to leave early. I said we could wait. Not because I wanted to see anyone squirm. But because I wanted to see what happens when truth doesn't rush. We didn't stay until the end. My husband waited until the cake was cut, until speeches ran out of steam, until the room settled into a softer noise. Then he stood, thanked the couple politely, and offered his hand to me like this was any other evening. My mother watched us leave. She didn't follow. She didn't call my name. She just stood there, eyes fixed on our backs, finally seeing what she had refused to look at for years. The consequences didn't come that night. They came later. Quietly. Phone calls that started with curiosity instead of judgment. Questions asked carefully, as if the answers might rearrange things. Invitations that suddenly included my name without hesitation. My parents stopped introducing me with qualifiers. They stopped explaining my choices for me. My sister adjusted too. Not warmly. Not unkindly. Just differently. Her groom never joked with me again. He kept his distance, respectful now, like someone who had learned too late where the line was. No one apologized. They didn't have to. Because something more permanent had happened. The story they told about me no longer worked. At family gatherings after that, my husband and I were seated properly. Not as an afterthought. Not as a lesson. Just present. When people asked questions, I answered them myself. My parents let me. That was enough. On the drive home that night, my husband asked if I was okay. I told him yes. And I meant it. I hadn't needed him to rescue me. I hadn't needed him to defend me. I just needed him to exist as he was. The truth did the rest. I don't feel bitterness when I think about that wedding anymore. I feel clarity. I chose a life that didn't impress my parents, but it never needed to. They learned something that day, without being taught. That dignity doesn't come from status. And respect doesn't come from noise. It arrives quietly. Sometimes wearing work boots. Sometimes late. But always right on time.